I'm Tim. Data Council is one of my favorite conferences. Just the caliber of individuals presenting, the caliber of attendees is through the roof. And Sean, you've curated a great track, so I'm honored to be here today. I have always loved experimentation, A/B testing. So early on in my career, I was doing something completely different. I was actually working in the pharmaceutical industry, designing drugs. And we would run experiments where the sample sizes were sometimes on maybe the dozens of test tubes, or even smaller, where it'd be like 3 rodents per group. So when anyone tells me I don't have enough samples to run A/B tests, it's like, I pull out these anecdotes. But early on in my career, I went to Meta, where we got to run experiments on a tremendous scale. So hundreds of millions of users in an experiment, and statistical power was like a wonderful luxury to have. But the thing that amazed me was I also went on to work in reality labs and on a lot of 0 to 1 products where we had only a few thousands of users in an experiment. And the really cool thing I thought about A/B testing was that the exact same statistical principles and methods you use work at a small scale as they do a really large scale. And today, I am the head of data at Statsig, and we are known for being an experimentation platform company. I no longer get to run that many experiments myself, but I say I live vicariously through our customers. A little bit on Statsig. For those of you who are from the Bay Area, you may know us that we did a large billboard campaign last year with a bunch of cheeky billboards. But for those who haven't, we are a modern product development platform. We help product teams move fast and help them make data-driven decisions. We're best known for experimentation, but we also have a suite of other features, including feature flagging, a unified metrics catalog, customized dashboards, and product analytics. In just 4 years, we have enabled some of the most innovative companies across a wide variety of sectors, including AI, social media, gaming, and beyond. Some numbers that sort of share our scale that we're operating at today. We are processing over 1 trillion events a day. We have over 20,000 weekly active customers logging into our console, getting results, and they represent over 1,000 companies. And we are serving end-to-end 10,000 live experiments at any given point in time. But during our journey, I noticed something very interesting about our customer base. And keep in mind, I had a B2C background. 1/3 of our customers are B2B. B2C is the face of experimentation to me. Like, folks know the 41 Shades of Blue experiment from Google. Folks talk about Microsoft. Folks talk about Facebook, Netflix. These are the folks you read about and that celebrate A/B testing. There's no B2B customers in this list. And it's something that's not talked about. So when I saw these customers using our product, I viewed it with great skepticism. And I was a little worried that these folks would be very disappointed. Thank you. But our customers that were doing this, they were experienced. Some of them were experienced B2B experimenters. This is just what they know. And they were able to use our platform to unlock experimentation for themselves. We also had a few folks who were brand new to experiments, and they were like, why not? Why won't this work? And they would just give it a try. And so what I'm here to share with you today is a topic that I don't feel like is talked about a lot, which is B2B experiments. And I'm going to share with you some of the things I have learned by working with our customers. And if you're not in the B2B space today, I think you're still going to find a lot of useful information here that you can apply to your own experiments. There are 2 ways to make business and product decisions. And you can use intuition or you can use data. I don't need to convince this audience which one I think is right, but I will share with you some of my talking points in case you have to convince others. In my opinion, experimentation is the #1 and most effective way to build a data-driven culture. You can just very simply, you randomize your users, you apply a centuries-old statistical test, and suddenly you get, boom, you get causal data. You learn that if we do X, Y happens. You don't need any causal inference models. You don't have to talk about propensity scores, synthetic controls. You don't get into causation or correlation debates. With A/B testing, you get the scientific gold standard for causation just right out of the box. And I think that's why this is so popular. of a tool. But skeptics, will say that, listen, I've done experiments, they're not really that useful. That's because they're doing it wrong. If you dabble in experiments and all it does is confirm your intuition is right, that's not helpful. Where the value of experiments comes from is by being surprised. It's learning that 2/3 of your ideas don't work. It's from learning that building products is actually exceptionally hard, moving metrics is even more challenging, and it's realizing you may not understand your users and your products as well as you thought. I think when you're faced with real A/B testing data that's in your face, that's when you have to be intellectually honest with yourself and try to figure out, like, okay, what should I need to correct in my understanding to make this fit this reality? Learning in a quantitative way, this allows people to safely test broader ideas, and this builds a culture of learning, and it builds a culture of innovation at your company. All right, I shared this tweet before, but this is Sean's track, and I have to pull this out one more time. This is absolutely one of my favorite tweets, and I don't think it got a lot of attention. Yeah, 35 likes. What? He says, everyone's running experiments, but only some of them have control groups and randomization. I love this because if you say I'm not running A/B tests, but you're shipping features, you are running an experiment. You're not measuring it. In fact, that's being kind. You're not measuring it as effectively as it can. In fact, most people at the end of the half will then go and ask themselves, hey, why did our user base not grow? And then you're back to doing the correlation analyses, or more likely, just falling back on intuition. So that's enough for this. I think I've made the case. People here are probably already believers, but let's go to the B2B topic, which you came here for. There are 3 growth strategies in B2B, and it's based on how you acquire users, how you retain them, and how you expand their usage. There's sales-led. Sales-led is super high touch. It's personalized, relationship-driven. I don't think there's a lot of room for experimentation here. There's marketing-led, though. Marketing-led starts to get a little bit more interesting for the folks here. This is where the brand awareness, content marketing, and ads are explicitly driving users to your website, and now it's your website's job to convert them into a sign-up or into a paid account. The experimentation playbook here is somewhat straightforward. It's a reason why so many marketers are into A/B testing, but this isn't that interesting to me, even though the playbook is here. Where I think gets really interesting is product-led growth. Product-led growth is like this hot new thing in B2B, and by new I mean within the last 10 years. This is where your product is the sales and marketing engine. The reason companies love PLG strategy is this is very scalable. Just make your product better, and the users will come. Users will hear about the product from invites and word of mouth. They sign up themselves, so you don't have any salespeople involved, and they try the product for free in most cases. They find out they love it, they retain, they expand their usage over time, they invite their friends and coworkers. Experimentation is perfect for this sort of strategy because it actually, increasing usage is exactly like what they do in B2C products. The poster child for PLG is Dropbox. Dropbox was sort of the first company that really did this well. You signed up as a user, you got 2 gigabytes. That was enough to understand what this product is, enough to get some utility out of it. If you invited folks in, you got 250 megabytes per invite. Dropbox makes it really easy to share and collaborate on documents between devices and between users. And sure enough, you'd end up with an employee that had all of their coworkers sharing things on Dropbox, and suddenly this company now needs to get an enterprise plan. This strategy was so successful that for Dropbox, B2B now drives 70% of their revenue today. But this sort of experimentation can look a little bit different from B2C. In normal A/B testing, the standard practice is to randomize your user base, just 50-50. Every single user gets a flip of a coin. This ensures that users have a consistent experience between sessions, and you can attribute the user-level metrics to the experimental effect. However, in a B2B context, it means that you can have users within the same organization. Some of them will be a mix between test and control. And the problem here is that people talk to each other. People share screens, people collaborate, people write docs. People want to know, hey, how come you can do that and I can't? These groups interact, and this is a violation of Sattva. So you can imagine rolling out a dashboard feature to half of all users. What happens if screenshots are shared? What happens if people are confused and said, how did you do that? Like, I don't have that filter box. Now both groups have learned about this feature, and you've lost any sort of way to interpret these results. This is easy to solve, though. Instead of randomizing at the user level, for B2B, we want to randomize at the org level. This eliminates the intra-organizational interference, and it means that we can measure the experimental effect at the organization level. The cross-talking between buckets is now minimized. This is great, right? Maybe not quite. This introduces actually a series of new problems, which will be the sort of the focus of this talk. We had maybe thousands of users, but now potentially we just have hundreds of organizations. So our sample size has dropped dramatically. Additionally, the size of the orgs are going to be highly skewed. We're going to end up with some whales that are going to be just ginormous enterprises, and we're going to have a lot of very small companies in this. Combining them together into an experiment is going to cause all sorts of problems and challenges. I've compiled up the challenges into these 6. There's probably more, but these are the ones I'll at least talk about. The first is managing opt-in and opt-out. In B2B, you have to figure out how do you want to randomize and who do you want to include in the experiment. The second one is the unit of analysis may not be your unit of randomization. I talked about you want to randomize at the org level. User level metrics still matter a lot. Third, metrics sensitivity. Metrics in B2B are notoriously laggy. You could think about annual renewal rate as being sort of the worst one. But they're going to be noisy and fairly sparse as well. So we'll talk about how to pick a good metric. There is underpowered experiments. We have hundreds of orgs now, so maybe not millions of users. And we're going to run into underpowered situations. So there's a lot of techniques that we can use and strategies. Extremely right-skewed data. We are going to have fat tails for a lot of our metrics that we're looking at. So if you're a payments processor like Stripe, you can imagine that you have an experiment where you are shoving Amazon and DoorDash into a control group that's also got the local mom and pop shop and literally Girl Scout troops. This situation is actually the norm in B2B, and so we'll go over some of those strategies. And lastly, heterogeneous effects matter a lot. Heterogeneous effects are always important in B2C, but I find in B2C you still optimize for the average user, and knowing the heterogeneous effect is just like an interesting nuance or detail. But in B2B, this is actually critical to your business success and strategy. So we'll talk about how to be intentional with those trade-offs. I am going to use an analogy, and I apologize, this is kind of a bad analogy on retrospect, but I'm not changing the slide. We're going to talk about airlines using fare class as a metaphor for how you treat your customers. There are 4 cases I can identify for how a company may want to approach experimentation. So we'll have our first-class passengers. These are our VIPs. They're going to have strict SLAs and expect a premium product, and they don't want any of the risk with it. So what that means is we're not going to experiment on these users. They don't want experiments. They don't want anything half-baked. Business class, though, these folks expect access to all the latest and greatest, and they don't want to find out that someone else got a new feature before they did. So they want to have early access to everything. Next is you're probably our loyal customers. These folks have been with us for a long time, but they don't want anything to change. They want it stable. They want it to look the same year over year. And lastly, we have our discounted fare class. In B2B, this could be your freemium tier. There's not a lot of guarantees we're offering these customers. And for experimentation, because this audience is so large, this is prime experimentation territory. These folks don't have strict expectations, and they're just happy their seat reclines. To manage this, you'll want to have a very powerful and flexible feature flagging system that lets you manage all of these, codify all of these rules that you have and determine who gets in an experiment and who doesn't. I promise that's the last metaphor. All right, one of the first rules of thumb in experimentation is your unit of randomization should match your unit of analysis. But user-level metrics matter a lot here. For example, we'll want to know what the feature adoption rate is per user, if you're in B2B, or time spent maybe. This means that we need user-level metrics, and we need to match them to the org-level assignments. You can do this if you have a user-to-org mapping table, but this works very cleanly only if it's a one-to-many. So you have one user maps to one organization. Many users map to one org. If it's messier, like a many-to-many, you're going to have to be a little bit more careful. And I know that sounds weird to be in many orgs, but I'll give an example. How many folks here are in more than a dozen Slack workspaces? See, if you are doing experimentation at Slack, at the org level, you're going to have to be very careful about which users are in this experiment and what you're trying to measure. Companies can solve this by building hybrid metrics. This is where you take an org level number and divide it by, or normalize it by a number of users. But what users do we count is going to matter a lot. Do we include the total number of employees a customer has? Do we include the number of accounts that they've signed up? Or do we include the daily actives? This is going to affect the interpretation of this metric, and it's something to be cognizant of. And since we're inherently dealing with a ratio metric, we will want to make sure we're applying a delta method to account for the correlation between the numerator and denominator. And we'll also, and this is my biggest pet peeve with ratio metrics, you want to report on the components, the numerator and denominator. Ratio metrics do a great job of hiding some very important details. If you have a metric like number of docs created per daily active user, it is entirely possible the number of docs created goes up and number of daily active users goes up even more. The ratio metric, number of docs created per daily active user, goes down. And for a lot of folks, they'll say like, this is a bad experiment. We must abort. But we've got two good things that happened. Number of docs went up, number of users went up. And this can happen with a lot of these metrics if you're trying to drive usage. All right, selecting the right metric. My general advice is to start with a very good operational metric, always in an A/B test. If you are, and I hate button metaphors in experimentation because I feel like they're overused, but they're very easy to visualize. If you have added a new button to some UI somewhere, the metric I say you have to have is the number of times you showed that button or the number of times that button was clicked. This is not at all important for like reading out the experiment, but it's, for me, the quickest way you know whether the engineer has set up the experiment correctly. If that metric didn't even move, something is wrong. So that's an operational metric. But on the spectrum of metrics, you can go all the way to the business metrics, the metrics that the C-suite cares about. So most oftentimes going to be revenue. Every metric is in the spectrum somewhere, and ultimately you want to move revenue, but that makes a very bad experimentation metric for many, many, many reasons. So pick something along. Your hypothesis metric should be something along the spectrum, but I recommend a smattering so that you at least be able to draw the linkage and the connection between your operational metric to something that might matter. A lot of metrics in B2B are going to be lagging and sparse. So annual revenues is very lagging. I've seen folks sometimes use long-term holdouts. I personally think that does not work great in B2B, so just be forewarned. But proxy metrics are an area that I think I've seen a lot of value in. So instead of renewals, maybe let's focus on whether people are actually using the features that you're launching. So or time to first value is a good one, early indicator of here, or feature activation rate. If you need to validate these proxy metrics, and this is going to be heresy for the experimentation crowd, but I believe that you can read some information in directional metrics that are not statistically significant. So maybe you didn't see revenue go up, but we saw our key metric of time to first value go up. you should at least sort of sanity check the revenue at least kind of move in a consistent direction that you expected. If you are strapped for statistical power, top of the funnel is where most of your users are going to be. And you can also do bottom of the funnel experiments. Sometimes you'll find metrics behave a lot better at the bottom, but you want to make sure that your experiment is not diluted. And so you want to focus on only experiment on users that make it to that stage of the funnel. All right, underpowered experiments. This is not new to anyone. I'm going to say you should always run a power analysis. But the one thing I've noticed is that folks who are very experienced in experimentation, or folks who are managing maybe a dozen experiments at once, have stopped running power analyses out of routine. They sort of take it for given. They sort of take it for granted. I think this is really, really critical in B2B because now you've got metrics that are not behaving well, and you'll want to make sure that you're very careful about how you select these. And in addition, there's a lot of variance reduction techniques which will help when pick a good metric. I'll talk about more of that later. And I think it's also okay that if you don't think you've got enough power to get statistically be able to tell whether your test is better than control, you can run a non-inferiority experiment. There is no shame in doing that. There's other methods that you can use here if you don't have enough statistical power. User research, observational, anecdotal data. These are all useful for building a complete story that you can kind of add to your experimental results. All right, we're going to get to variance reduction now. This is a really popular method to enhance statistical power. Cupid is probably the most well-known of these. Cupid stands for Controlled Experiments Using Pre-Experimental Data. It was popularized by Microsoft in a paper in 2013, and it relies on an observation that a large amount of the variance that we observe in experimentation is actually correlated to pre-experimental activity. If we go back to my metric of number of docs created, if you have an organization that's using Google Docs and they created 250 docs last week, how much would you bet they're going to create this week? The number is not going to be 2 or 3. It's going to be around 250, right? So it's correlated. And the cool thing about B2B is that these metrics are very well correlated, actually way more powerful than in B2C contexts. So how it works is you can plot pre-experimental values against what experimental results you see, and you'll find this correlation, and you can do an analysis on a regression here in order to compute the experimental deltas. Cupid is typically reported as giving you 30 to 60% shrinkage on your confidence intervals. In B2B, what we actually observe is anywhere from 60 to 80, and that's because the metrics are very well correlated. This is probably the most powerful advice I can give folks who are running B2B experiments. You absolutely want to use Cupid. There's other variance reduction methods. We recently launched Cure, which is just a regression on covariates. You can also do ML-based reductions. I think somebody talked about that here today. I found something really weird, Sean, variance weighted estimators. Check out that paper. Bayesian, I'm going to get some Bayesian person's going to be really mad I put it on the slide. But you can, if you enrich your data with prior information, that can also lead to a shrinkage in your tighter confidence in your estimates. And lastly, there are some situations you can actually get away with a paired t-test, believe it or not. All right, highly right-skewed data. There are almost all B2B metrics look like this chart. Everything, there's this fat tail where that kind of goes on, and you've got outliers sitting on the right side. And there are two common methods that we use in B2C experiments to deal with outliers. The first is Windsorization. We can take these outliers and sort of like move them to some percentile value. This has a way of minimizing their effect and their pull on the average and reducing down the variance significantly. This is sort of an acknowledgement that, hey, maybe we're not optimizing for these outliers, but we should at least count them as significant values. The other way is called trimming. This is where we just say, like, these are outliers that are actually just bad data. Like this is a logging bug. This is something we don't want to be optimizing for. This is some user that's doing something really, really weird, and we just want to remove this outright. In B2B, though, neither of these methods really respect the importance of these outliers. Like these outliers are your business. These are your whales. These are your customers that you know by first name and that you've given white glove treatment to. And so you'll want to make sure that you don't just like smash their data down. And so the way we can do that, though, is that I'm going to go into a bit of a story about stratified sampling as the punchline. But randomization can be very random. This is just a company this is made up data. But there is 15 companies listed. You can imagine that there is a long tail of customers, companies that this person may have in an experiment. But they've got 2 whales. And if we just randomly assign it, there's actually a 50% chance that those 2 whales end up in the same bucket. And then if we were to break down their customer base by 4 different categories, startups, small, medium, and enterprise, you can see it's very easy to get just slight shifts in the data where like enterprise has 2-to-1 ratio, and then on the small side, it's kind of like leaning the other way. This data is just like, this is very possible when you're just doing random assignment, and you have very little control over this if you just do it this way. Instead, we can actually do a method called stratified sampling where we actually carefully balance the assignment. There's 2 popular methods to do this. The first is you can pre-assign the organizations, and so you store the assignments in some database that you can look up. This is not the ideal method from an engineering standpoint because you have to look up from this table consistently. It's not scalable. You've got latency in the request and the user experience. The way to do it is using a modern assignment method where the assignments are instant because they're seed-based. There's a seed where you can just basically take a hash of a user identifier or org identifier and the seed, and you'll immediately know on the fly whether they're in the test or the control group. This is really good because it can be evaluated on iOS, Android, backend services. Everybody has the exact same instant evaluation. And how you get this balanced method is something called Seed Finder. You can pre-screen thousands of seeds offline, and you literally cherry pick the most balanced one, and so you can end up with a distribution like this where everything from head to tail is evenly balanced. This sort of method does not work that well in B2C because it's dependent on knowing which users are going to show up in an experiment. But for B2B, usage is very, very predictable. If it's very rare to have an organization that's been heavily using your product just suddenly not show up for a week. Even if individuals go on vacations, it's unlikely everyone is out. And then lastly, it's going to be understanding heterogeneous effects. In B2C, we often lean on the average treatment effect. We want to make decisions that are good for your average user. And heterogeneous effects are an important thing to know for diagnostic purposes, perhaps, or maybe you can glean some sort of insight of what's working and what's not working. But it generally doesn't drive the go or no-go decision in B2C. But in B2B, segmentation matters an awful lot. And there's many different ways B2B companies may segment their user base. You can do it by revenue, you can do it by geography, you can do it by size, you can do it by the industry that they're in. And so if you're going to do it by size, for example, your whales matter a lot. If you have a new feature, and I'm just showing this is made up data. If you have a new feature, for example, like you're launching a new AI feature, I'm sure folks are trying that. What happens if your enterprise customers are not doing well with this feature? You don't necessarily want to hurt them, even though your average customer loves this feature. This is important details to know because these are and that can affect your decision how bad the regression is. And if your experiments are affecting your segments differently, you just want to be explicit of those trade-offs. Maybe your company believes the future is going to be in finance, and so therefore they're doubling down on everything to drive the success of all their financial customers. Well, you'll want to make sure that your experimental results and your interpretation of those are at least consistent with your company's top-line strategy. So in B2B, heterogeneity isn't a footnote, it's the headline. All right, this is the conclusion slide. These are the key takeaways, and I think you'll notice that the key theme here is like these B2B challenges that we found, that some of them are unique to B2B, but in general, these are the same problems we see in B2C. And B2B really just exists at the fringes of experimentation. So the first is we want to do org level randomizations, and because of this, we're going to have to deal with smaller sample sizes, right, skewed metrics, and very sparse and lagging metrics as well. It is important to sort of remember to go back to the fundamentals of A/B testing. You'll want to have really robust, good metrics. You want to make sure you remember to do a power analysis, and you'll also want to make sure you're very clean and clear on what your hypothesis is. And lastly, there's a lot of advanced techniques that you can use and should use in the B2B space. The reason why is that these methods actually work better in B2B than they do in B2C in most cases. Cupid and variance reduction techniques tend to be more powerful. Stratified sampling is something that is great and we've seen be very successful. And you'll also want to make sure you're looking at the heterogeneous effects and understanding what's going on and just being very intentional with the trade-offs. All right, if you like experiments, this is a QR code to connect with me on LinkedIn. And otherwise, thank you very much for attending this talk.